The morning of December 17, 1944, the Ardennes forest on the border of Belgium and Germany. It felt as if the entire world had abandoned this place. There was no color here, only endless shades of gray. The sky pressed down like a lead weight, and the snow buried every inch of the earth. The temperature was 10 degrees below zero. With every breath, it felt like inhaling 1,000 tiny needles of ice. Obergf-Reiter Hans Muller was curled up in a foxhole. It was narrow, damp, and smelled of wet woolen fear. His fingers were purple with cold, his joints stiff. Yet he wrote obsessively in his diary. Around him, thousands of German soldiers were vibrating with a manic excitement. This was the Führer's last gamble, Operation Watch on the Rhine. Under heavy fog, they had just launched a surprise assault. In that moment, victory seemed within their grasp. But not for Muller. His eyes didn't hold that fanaticism. They held a deep, bottomless dread, the kind of look found only in men who had stared into the abyss of the Eastern Front. Every word he scratched into that paper felt like it was carved by a trembling soul. He wrote the new replacements are laughing. They see the Americans running like rabbits ahead of us, but they don't understand. They haven't seen it yet. The Americans are not like the Russians. The Russian artillery is like a tsunami, chaotic, wild, overwhelming. The American artillery, my God, that is something else entirely. It is not fire. It is a cold, precise mechanical movement. It is a death sentence where you have no time to regret. Muller closed his diary and looked up through the thin, camouflage netting. The fog was thick, visibility less than 50 meters. For the Germans, this was perfect cover. The Allied Air Force was grounded. But Muller knew there was something else out there, something more terrifying than a bomber, something that didn't need clear skies. The battlefield fell into a strange, suffocating silence. The distant rattle of machine guns ceased. Only the wind moaned. It was unnatural, like a horror movie where the sound cuts out right before the jump scare. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Time seemed to congeal. Instinctively, Muller curled into a ball, pressing his face into the frozen dirt. He put his hands over his ears, mouth wide open, a veteran's reflex to equalize pressure, to stop his eardrums from bursting. In the next instant, the world collapsed. There was no warning. There was no incoming whistle. That rising shriek boom sound is for the survivors. This time, the sound and the death arrived simultaneously. Hundreds of heavy, high explosive shells seemed to teleport from the void. If you had been looking down from a God's eye view, you would have seen something that defied the laws of physics. Scattered miles behind the lines, a dozen American artillery batteries firing from different locations had synchronized their fire. Some fired early, some fired late, purely so that every single shell would impact the same target in the exact same microsecond. This was the American artillery's ultimate killer, move time on target, before the shockwave of the first explosions could even expand. The second and third waves were already stacking on top of it. The air was instantly superheated to thousands of degrees. The forest, once white with snow, became a radiant black inferno. Ancient trees were snapped like matchsticks. Human bodies were disintegrated by pure overpressure. That squad of new recruits was wiped from the surface of the earth. Muller felt the ground heave violently beneath him, as if the forest itself was convulsing in pain. This was not war. This was industrialized slaughter. It was the assembly lines of Detroit and the mathematics of MIT delivering a crushing blow. This was the U.S. Army artillery of 1944. But before the horror, German perception of the Americans was steeped in arrogance. Let's turn the clock back 2 years. 1942, North Africa. The Wehrmacht was still basking in the glory of conquering Europe. In the Tunisian desert, the battle-hardened Afrika Corps met the American G. What did the American GI look like to the Germans back then? They looked like uniformed Boy Scouts. German officers watched as American troops moved in loose formations, smoking cigarettes. They dug shallow trenches and screamed for support at the slightest resistance. German reports were filled with dismissive slurs. Cowboys, gangsters, playboys softened by Hollywood and jazz. Otto Schmidt, a German artillery captain, described his early impressions. He wrote their equipment was good, every truck was better than ours, but they didn't know how to fight. Their artillery was aimless. At KIS Serenity Pass, we chased them like ducks. We thought they were just Italians with more money. We thought war was a duel of knights. Decided by courage, tactics, and the will to use the bayonet. This arrogance persisted even after D-Day in 1944. The Germans stubbornly believed that if they could just mass their panzers, they could slice through American lines just as they had sliced through Poland or France. They made a fatal, irreversible mistake. They were judging a starship fleet with the eyes of a gladiator. They didn't realize that behind those gum-chewing, slacker-looking GIS stood a system so massive, so precise. Composed of mathematicians, engineers, radio experts, and automated factories that it rendered courage irrelevant. A shift in fear usually began with a tiny, insignificant black dot in the sky on the Western Front. The thing a veteran German panzer commander feared most wasn't the Sherman tank that was just a Ronson lighter, easy to burn. It wasn't the American infantry. It wasn't even the P-47 Thunderbolt. The thing they feared most was a slow-flying, toy-like light aircraft. The L-4 Grasshopper. Imagine the scene. You are sitting in the turret of a Tiger tank. You are the king of the battlefield. Your 88mm gun can destroy anything in sight. Suddenly, your headset crackles with a panicked warning from the lookout. Etch count. 12 o'clock, low altitude, Grasshopper. You look up and see that fragile little thing circling at treetop height. It has canvas skin that can't stop a pistol bullet. It has no bombs, no machine guns. But in that moment, even the most arrogant SS commander would kick open the hatch and scream, bail out. Run. Scatter. Why? Because German veterans lived by a truth written in blood. If you see the Grasshopper, you have less than 3 minutes to write your will. Pilot of that plane wasn't sightseeing. In his hand, he held the keys to the gates of hell, a radio handset. In this war, information was death. On the Eastern Front, if the Russians wanted to saturate a target, they went through a long process. Forward observers sent runners or used unreliable field phones. The battery commander got out a map, used a protractor, calculated. Fired a spotting round, corrected, fired another, corrected again. That took 30 minutes. 30 minutes was enough time for a German tank to finish a coffee, refuel, and casually relocate. But against the Americans, this logic failed. When that Grasshopper spotted you, the pilot simply radioed a grid coordinate. That electrical signal traveled instantly to the massive central nervous system of the American military. 3 minutes later, not one gun, not one battery, but an entire corps artillery group, including one 55mm long toms into 3mm heavy howitzers. They would act as if they shared a single brain. They would dump tons of steel onto your exact square meter of earth. This wasn't combat. It was death by express delivery. And the engine behind this instant kill capability was the American artillery S-RU secret weapon. A place with no smell of gunpowder, but more dangerous than any explosive, the Fire Direction Center, or FDC. This was a concept the Germans could never comprehend. In the German tradition, artillery was a craft. A good German officer had to be a mathematician. He hunched over a map table, calculating wind speed, air temperature, the rotation of the Earth, and propellant temperature. Manually working out the firing solution for each gun in his battery. It was an elitist art form, efficient but unscalable. If that officer died, the battery was paralyzed. The Americans, they brought the mindset of the Ford assembly line to the business of killing. Back in the U.S., at the Ardennes Proving Ground, thousands of female mathematics students were drafted. They sat in bright rooms, operating mechanical analog computers. They didn't fight. They did one thing: they compiled firing tables. They pre-calculated every possible variable in the world, from the heat of North Africa to the cold of the Ardennes, and printed them into thick little booklets. These booklets were distributed to every American F-to-C tent. There, you didn't see officers sweating over calculus. You saw soldiers with glasses, smoking Lucky Strikes, flipping through pages like accountants auditing a ledger. Target grid X 1 to 3, Y 4, 5, 6. Range 8,000, deflection left 3. No genius required. No inspiration needed. Just look up the value, read it, transmit it. They turned complex ballistics into something as simple as using a dictionary. This allowed the U.S. Army to react at the speed of human speech. Fire missions that took Germans to hours took Americans minutes. This wasn't a difference in soldier fitness, it was the despair of a craft workshop trying to fight an automated factory. But even that wasn't what chilled the Germans to the bone. The true supernatural terror came from a piece of black technology strictly banned before Christmas 1944. The VT fuse. Before this, artillery had two choices. Impact fuses exploded when they hit the ground. In the Ardennes, this was useless. Shells buried themselves in deep snow or soft mud, the explosion absorbed by the earth. If a German soldier stayed in his foxhole, he was safe. The other was the time fuse, set to explode in the air after a specific number of seconds. But this required impossible precision in range finding. Set it too early, it's a firework high in the sky. Set it too late, it buries in the mud. Allied command treated the VT fuse as a top secret. The variable time or proximity fuse was forbidden in Europe for fear the Germans would capture and reverse engineer it. But in the crisis of the Battle of the Bulge, facing Hitler's desperate armored flood, General Eisenhower signed the release order. The VT fuse was a miniature miracle. Inside the nose of a shell spinning at thousands of RPM sustaining thousands of GS of force. The Americans had stuffed a tiny radar transmitter. It was like a living thing with its own eyes as the shell plummeted from the sky. 10 to 20 meters above the ground, the radio waves bounced off the earth and told the fuse now, for the German grenadier. Hiding in an open foxhole, this was the last judgment. Previously, if you lay low, you lived. Now, death didn't come from the side. It came from directly above. A German sergeant who survived the bulge recalled with trembling hands those shells were like devils. They had eyes. They didn't touch the ground. They exploded at treetop height. Every inch of the ground was covered in shrapnel. My comrade, who had survived 3 years of shelling in that same hole, was shredded along with his steel helmet. It didn't matter how deep you dug. Unless you had a steel roof over your head, you were dead. In some sectors of the Ardennes, the VT fuses shaved the forest down to a crew cut. No whole bodies were found. Only tatters of gray field gray uniform hanging from the splintered stumps. Of course, all this high-tech wizardry. TOT, FDC, VT required a crude, simple foundation ammunition. Infinite ammunition. By 1944, German artillery was on a starvation diet. Every shell was precious. A German battery commander had to choose. I have 10 targets, but only enough shells for 2. They counted rounds like misers counting coins. Their supply lines still relied on horses. Yes, in the age of mechanized warfare, the Wehrmacht in 1944 still maintained over 1 million horses. When those horses died in the mud, the German guns became scrap metal. And the Americans? The Americans used artillery shells to scrub the earth, while German soldiers pushed wagons. The American Red Ball Express, a steel river of thousands of 2.5-ton trucks, roared down French highways. Detroit didn't sleep. Pittsburgh didn't cool down. America wasn't just arming itself, it was arming half the world. There is a story from the Ruhr Pocket that sums it up. An American infantry company was pinned down in a small town. To save these 100 or so men, American artillery expended, in a few hours, more ammunition than a German army corps saw in months. It was wasteful. It was arrogant. It was a vulgar display of resources, but the American logic was cold. If firing 10,000 shells saves the life of one American soldier, then fire 20,000. Fire 30,000. Level the town until nothing moves. This logic destroyed the German psyche. Franz Halder, the former chief of the German General Staff, a man of strategy and discipline, was captured after the war. When intelligence officers showed him the logistics data, the FDC manuals, and the VT fuses, the old general went silent. He realized that war was no longer about Nietzschean willpower or tactical genius. In his interrogation, he left a quote. That served as an epitaph for his era. We lost, not just the battle. We lost to a better system. While our artillery still had to calculate like artists, you turned war into an assembly line. We were using a 19th century mindset. To fight a 20th century industrial monster, Germany wasn't just beaten, it was crushed. Let's end where we began, in the Ardennes forest. Spring 1945, the snow has finally melted. An American recovery team enters a patch of woods that had been the target of a TOT barrage. It is still dead silent. The trees look like they've been combed by a giant rake. They found the body of Oberg F. Reiter Hans Muller. He hadn't been blown to pieces. The air-burst shrapnel from a VT fuse had perfectly avoided the sandbags and pierced him from above. His posture was strange. He was still clutching his fountain pen, his diary open on his knees. On the last blood-stained page, the handwriting was jagged and wild. The final record of despair. The sky is burning. If you can hear the sound, you are alive. If you cannot hear it, it means the American guns have already judged you. This was the Ardennes in 1944. There was no glory here, no knights, only cold mathematical formulas and ruthless industrial steel, playing a symphony of destruction. And those German officers who once laughed at the cowboys finally learned the brutal truth of modern war in that deafening roar in this industrial meat grinder. If you do not surrender, you simply disappear. If you want more hardcore breakdowns of history as deadliest miscalculations, smash that like button and subscribe. I am your strategy observer. I will see you on the next battlefield.